Hey guys, so in this video, I want to talk about, the Scarlet and Violet sets and ETB sets, specialty sets, and kind of build on yesterday's video when I talked about the only metric you really need to know in order to invest in booster boxes. So we're going to apply it today to, all the newer sets and kind of see if there are some trends. Again, if you didn't watch yesterday's video, we're going to be looking at top 3, top 5, top 10 value, and then look at booster box price and see if there's any correlation there to try and give us a better idea of what we should be investing heavier in, maybe what we should be moving out of. Maybe some things are undervalued, overvalued, etc. So starting off, we're going to look at SV base, and I haven't covered SV base on the channel in a long time. So there have been a lot of changes. The Gardevoir EX is now the most expensive card in the set, sitting around $51. The Miriam, not too far behind, but sitting around $35. The Drowsy is now up to third place, sitting around $30. The Ralts and Curlia, top 5 cards. Riolu is not too far behind as well, around $24. So a lot of these cards have seen insane growth. But when you look at top 3 value, still only $118. Top 5 value, 175 approximately, and top 10 around 275, 230, 273, 25 to be specific. Booster box price below the old MSRP 143.61. Or kind of like right at it, I guess technically. Next up, Paldea Evolved, Magikarp up top 225. You have the Iona sitting around $65. The Raichu in third place at 57. Tyranitar and Meryl rounding out the top 5 cards. And you do have a lot of good supporting cards in Paldea Evolved, but the Magikarp up top makes it $347, top 3 value, top 5 value 425, and top 10 value $552. And this, I believe, is the third highest top 3, top 5, and top 10 value, but the second highest booster box price currently. And again, we'll break all this down at the end. Moving into the third set, Obsidian Flames. I am a #1 Obsidian Flames hater. This set sucks. I don't get why everyone likes it or even says that there's decent cards in it. The market clearly doesn't agree with that. I mean, there are some cards I like. For example, the Ninetales. I remember when this was like an $8, $9 card. I said it was undervalued, so it doesn't surprise me that it's now worth like $25. The Scizor, when it was, $3, I said it was undervalued. So some of these have seen some love. But there's just not a ton of depth, right? The Charizard EX top hit, $76. Again, the Ninetales, 25. Another gold Charizard EX, $25. Cleffa sitting around $20. And then the Gloom is at $14. We're not going to count the Umbreon stamped promo. Some playable cards, but again, nothing too crazy. Top 3 value, $125. Top 3. Top 5 value around $160. And top 10 value sitting around $214. Now, even though that these top 3, top 5, and top 10 values are very low, it has the fourth highest booster box price out of all the Scarlet and Violet era sets so far. And we'll talk about that once we get through all this data. Next up, Paradox Rift, Groudon EX up top, over $100. The Altaria second place, $44. The Roaring Moon EX sitting around 39 right now. I think someone's trying to crash the market on these. So I imagine this is going to rebound into the 150s. So this kind of skewed the data maybe by $10, $15, something like that. The Iron Valiant EX and Steelix round out the top 5. But top 3 value for Paradox, $181, maybe closer to $200 realistically if the Roaring Moon price didn't tank on TCG Player. Top 5 value, $238 approximately. Top 10 value, $350. So outside the top 4 on all the sets and the booster box as well. Not even close. Next we have Temporal Forces. Raging Bolt sitting around $100. The Iron Crown EX, 60, 61. Same thing with the Walking Wake. Gouging Fire and Ghastly, both around $50, rounding out the top 5. And Ghastly, still moving up, right? Like that kind of found its home around the $30 price point, and it's slowly moved up over time. Morty's Conviction with Gengarnet sitting around 40 as well. Iron Leaves, Bianca, Sawsbuck surprisingly is sitting around $30 now. That's definitely a surprise. That and Deerling have moved up a lot. But when we look at the numbers of Temporal Forces, top 3 value 221, so a lot better than these other sets. Top 5 value $316 and top 10 value $471, giving it the fourth highest top 5 and top 10 value, but still not in the top 4 when it comes to booster box price. Then we have Twilight Masquerade coming after that. The Greninja, $327 up top. Eevee sitting around 95, Perrin over 70 as well. Carmine is sitting around $66, and Blood Moon Ursaluna ran out the top 5, $38. You do have some other nice cards like the Chansey, almost $30, Kieran, Lana's Aid. So not some bad cards. And when we look at the numbers, top three value, $496.65. Second highest top three value, second highest top five value at over $600, and second highest top 10 value at $730. But the third highest booster box price at $180 approximately. Second to last, we have Stellar Crown, the Terapagos sitting around 85. The Squirtle is now up to almost $80. And the Bulbasaur is sitting around $71, not too far behind. Hydrapple EX sitting around 32, 33, and Dashbun EX sitting around 28.50. That's going to be your top five. Stellar Crown, surprisingly, the fourth highest top three value cards at 231, almost $232. Top five value $293, and top 10 value 401. So outside of the top four in terms of top five and top 10 value. So very top heavy with the Bulbasaur and Squirtle and the Terapagos, and the booster box price sitting around $149 right now. And then finally, unsurprisingly, Surging Sparks Pikachu $486, the Latias EX $248, the Milotic 143, 144, Pikachu EX, I love this gold card, $133, and Hydreigon EX $85, $86 right now at the top five. Then you have the Alolan Executor, Lycia's Appeal, which is down to $60. Jasmine's Gaze, 45-ish, Latios in there as well. So when we look at top three value, $875. That's $375, $380 more than Twilight Masquerade. Over $1,000, almost $1,100 top five value, and $1,337 approximately top 10 value. It's a very elite set, guys. No memes there. And booster box price $246 as it should be. So when we look at the booster box prices for these sets, the only constant is Surging Sparks when it comes to the values. And this kind of tells me that we're still too early on in Scarlet and Violet era to make any, concrete assumptions about where this era is going, what sets are going to perform the best. But I would say right now, looking at this data, Surging Sparks is obviously the clear buy. Like, I would favor Surging Sparks over anything else by a long shot. There are other couple things that I think are close. For example, Paldea Evolved and Twilight Masquerade you should also be considering, but there is a large discrepancy, guys. Like, when you look at top three value, Surging Sparks is more than double what Paldea Evolved is, right? So those are things you need to consider. And I think some things you could kind of look at are undervalued, right? For example, Stellar Crown being worth less than something like Obsidian Flames, or even worth less than Paradox Rift at this point, it kind of seems like Stellar Crown is undervalued. And I know that there's going to be some factors at play here, and I know that they're close, but I think that Stellar Crown could potentially be worth a bit more than Paradox Rift if these trends continue, if the Bulbasaur and Squirtle hold up. And again, it's a really new set. So this is why you kind of need to give eras like a couple of years to sort themselves out, because it wouldn't surprise me in the long term if Paradox Rift is better than Stellar Crown, but not by much, right? I think these sets are going to be relatively close, and I think we can kind of make those assumptions at this point. SV Base is not going to perform as well as Surging Sparks. Paldea Evolved is probably not going to perform as well as Surging Sparks. Like, everything's going to be below Surging. Twilight Masquerade, I would also think is potentially a little undervalued. It has higher values across the board compared to Paldea Evolved, but it's $10 cheaper, so like 5% cheaper than Paldea right now. Again, it's a newer set. It could be primed for a reprint potentially, but it's got a solid top chase card. It's got good supporting cards as well in here, like the Eevee. Then you have the Carmine and Pairing in there as well. A little bit of waifu action. And then, the lower mid-tier depth isn't great, but again, it's something like a Lost Origin where you have a really solid chase card like the Giratina or the Greninja. You have a decent secondary chase. In this sense, it's now the Eevee, whereas you have the Aerodactyl and Lost Origin. Then you have some decent supporter cards after that. Lost Origin has the Pikachus. Twilight Masquerade has a couple waifus. So, there's a bit of difference there. But I think Twilight Masquerade could eventually pull ahead of Paldea Evolved just based on, the numbers and what's in each set. I think they're going to be close, though. So going either way is not a big deal. I think something that is a little interesting looking at this data is Obsidian Flames being the fourth most expensive. I would definitely not be buying Obsidian Flames over Temporal, Paradox Rift, Stellar Crown. I think all of those sets have much more potential in the long term compared to Obsidian Flames. And when we look at potential factors, right, the playability of cards in the set could play a role in booster box price. For example, The Charizard in there. Let's take a look at what else is in there. I believe the Charizard was playable. Pidgeot EX for a long time was playable. Maybe it still is. And you can kind of get a good idea when you look at just the regular EXs, right? Like the Pidgeot is a $3.60 card. The Charizard one is over $3. So yeah, I do believe there's some playability in these cards, which has lent itself a bit to potentially having a booster box price higher than some of these other sets. Also, we got to consider release date. Obsidian Flames came out before Paradox, came out before Temporal Forces, came out before Stellar Crown, obviously. So this is why you got to give it time. Wait a few years, see how things eventually play out. And that's why doing last year and even into this year, but a lot of prices have already moved on Sword and Shield. Like last year was a really good time to look at Sword and Shield and get a good idea of what sets were performing the best. So that's why I think we need to wait another year, year and a half to get a really good idea of SB era and what's going to happen. But you can already tell Surgeon's going to be better than all of these. Reprints as well. That was another thing I wanted to talk about. So we haven't got reprints on some of these sets yet, and that's probably going to affect prices. But we're going to talk about this point, reprints, more when we look at the ETBs here in a second. And then finally, public perception and fun sets. Some of these sets are just more enjoyable to open than others. Potentially, for example, like Paradox Rift, the pull rates were better, so you get more hits. And again, pull rates I have down here as kind of irrelevant because I saw some people bring that up in the comments yesterday that we need to consider pull rates. And pull rates will affect the raw price of these cards, right? So when we look at something like Paradox Rift, where the pull rates were a bit easier than, for example, Surging Sparks, it makes sense why these numbers on some of these top cards are a bit lower potentially. Like if the Groudon was in Surging Sparks, for example, maybe it's a $150 card, right? Or something like that. But they're irrelevant in the sense that, this number is going to be independent, or excuse me, our ranking based on the numbers of the top chase cards in the set is going to be independent of what pull rates say, because we're going to have those numbers either way. So sure, I mean, consider them in the sense that it's going to affect the booster box price and the ETB price, but it's not going to be relevant when we look at our ranking and trying to correlate between the top 3, top 5, and top 10 values of certain sets. That's all I'm trying to say. For example, Crown Zenith and 151, which we can get to in a second. I just want to jump in here and say 63% of you guys approximately still aren't subscribed to the channel. So, I hate asking all the time, but when I ask, more people actually subscribe, shockingly. So if you're getting some value out of this content, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe. So thank you ahead of time if you do that. And moving into Crown Zenith and some of these other specialty sets, you have the Giratina V-Star, $208. The Arceus V-Star, $133. The Mewtwo V-Star, $116. And Origin Form, Palkia, and Dialga sitting at $93 and $86 respectively in the top 5 value. When we look at top 3 value, though, $456, almost $457. Top 5 value, $637. And top 10 value, $836. So this is the third highest top 3 and top 5 value, and the second highest, rather, top 10 value. So there is a lot of depth in Crown Zenith, but shockingly, only the third highest ETB price. Next up, we have 151. Charizard EX, $243, moving towards $250 now. Blastoise, $88. Venusaur, $84. Zapdos, $62. Charmander, $52. Top 3 value is $418 approximately. Top 5 value, $532. And top 10 value, $760, $761. This is the fourth highest top 3, top 5, and top 10 value. But when we look at the ETB price, it is the highest ETB of SV era right now. And I know Crown Zenith isn't SV era, but I figured I would throw it in just because, it's a set that's very close to when SV era started. And there is a lot of relevance when we talk about, some of these being the best specialty sets, at least in the modern era. So the ETB price, right? Super high. And this is kind of why I talked about reprints. We've gotten a lot of restocks of certain products for 151, like the booster bundles, as well as the Blooming Waters collections, but we really haven't seen a reprint on 151 ETBs or restocks at Walmart or anything like that. So again, if there aren't reprints of certain products, that's why these booster box prices, for example, Obsidian Flames or the 151 ETBs could potentially be out of sorts. I don't think that's really why the Obsidian Flames booster box is higher than a lot of these other ones, but for the 151 ETB, I definitely think that plays a role in it. And also just fun perception as well. When you look at these top 3, top 5, and top 10 values, Not as high as any of these other sets. Like it's lower than three of them, which we'll talk about. But everyone thinks 151 is the best set of all time, and I think a lot of that is tied to nostalgia, and it's what people grew up with. So it's a fun set for them to open, see their old fan favorite Pokemon that they liked as a kid. So again, public perception I think plays a bit of a role, but also just release date, reprints, all of that plays a factor. And again, pull rates. Pull rates are relevant to determine the amount a card is worth. And again, I'm kind of repeating myself and ranting a bit at this point, but it's not going to be relevant when we are just, ranking these individually against each other. So third one here, Paldean Fates, $346, excuse me. Charizard EX is up to 210 now. The Gardevoir, $94, Pikachu, 40, Charmander, 26. This can be your top five. Top 3 value, $636. Top 5 value, $702. And top 10 value, $800.52, sitting at $91.35. The Paldean Fates ETB is cheaper than Crown Zenith. It's cheaper than 151, and it's cheaper than Prismatic Evolutions. Shrouded Fable, Earthen Vessel, $60. Persians up to 50. Fezandipity around $50. It's a playable card. Cassiopeia, 45, and then the Houndoom over 40 now at 41.86. These cards are continuing to move up. But top 3 value, $161. Top 5 value around $250. Top 10 value, $395, and it's a sub $40 ETB. And then finally, the big boy Prismatic Evolutions, $2,564. Top 3 value, obviously, most of that is the Umbreon. You have the Sylveon EX and the Leafeon up top. Then you have the Umbreon Master Ball, you have the Espeon EX, and then following suit, Vaporeon, Glaceon, Flareon, Jolteon, and the regular Eevee. Roaring Moon, I forgot. I talked about this card, and I didn't think it was going to hold its value. I forgot that it's, what's his name, Shinji Kanda, the guy who did the Giratina. I forgot he was the artist, so it's probably going to hold that value, or at least a lot of the value, just because people like the artist, right? I kind of forgot about that, but again, top 3 value in the set, $2,564. Top 5 value, $3,290. Top 10 value, $4,620 approximately. This is a $113 ETB. So when you look at this, right, Prismatic Evolutions in the long run, even if these prices half, right? Like imagine the top 3 value is only $1,200 or something, or even $1,000, right? We see a huge decrease in price, which I don't think is realistic. I think that Umbreon's going to stay over $1,000. But even if prices halved, whatever, it's still going to be miles ahead of the second closest specialty set. So when I'm looking at this data, right, there's no way that Prismatic Evolutions ETBs should be cheaper than 151 right now, at least in my opinion. And then honestly, when you look at Paldean Fates, it's surprising to me that Paldean Fates, with its numbers being much higher, at least for top 3 and top 5 value, being cheaper than Crown Zenith. I understand Crown Zenith is older. A lot of people might think that Paldean Fates is going to get a reprint. A lot of people love opening Crown Zenith. It is an awesome set. So again, that's where we need to consider fun sets, public perception, reprints, etc. Release date. You can consider all these factors a little bit, but long term, I don't imagine that this is going to be lower than Crown Zenith. I think that Paldean Fates, and again, it could totally depend on if there is a reprint, what happens to prices. They could come down. Who knows what's going to happen? The market is kind of all over its place. But just based on these numbers, if they do hold something similar where, Paldean Fates top 3 and top 5 value are higher than Crown Zenith, especially top 3 chase cards, I think you could see Paldean Fates overtake Crown Zenith just in terms of raw ETB price at some point. But something more safe, I think a safer guess that you could make, Prismatic Evolutions eventually is going to just dominate all of these sets. And it's probably going to dominate potentially even some of these these booster box prices. Like a Prismatic ETB should probably be worth more than like an Obsidian Flames or an SV based booster box. It just look at the raw difference in top 10 card value. $237 or $273 top 10 value in SV base. $4,600 top 10 value in Prismatic Evolutions ETB. So which one would you guys value more at? I don't know. Again, a lot of these prices are still off. We need to wait a year. But I think Prismatic Evolutions, there's no way it's going to be cheaper than any of these 4 sets. Probably within a year's time. I really don't, unless they print it to the ground. But even if that happens, I think you're going to see a lot of resilience in this. And again, if it's something like 151 where we don't get that reprint of the ETBs, this number is going to skyrocket very, very fast. And again, I'm going to be working with this type of data over the coming years because I really want to figure out if there is kind of like a sweet spot where it makes sense mathematically to say things are a buy or not a buy. I feel like there is kind of, some way we could work with this data and really dial in scientifically using our brains where we think things should go. Because honestly, a lot of this hobby is just based on bias. And I've come to realize that bias is just not a good tool. I thought Twilight Masquerade was going to be a hunk of garbage, and it's, the second most expensive set in Scarlet and Violet era so far when it comes to top 3 to top 10 value. So, yeah, I mean, you can always be wrong. And I think there's always going to be room for improvement when it comes to our biases. And that's why we need to look at things objectively, scientifically, instead of just, our emotional appeal. Anyways, guys, if you got some value out of this, I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe wherever you are in the world, and I'll catch you in the next one.